everybody. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to click the subscribe button and the bell icon so you get notified of each new video as they come out.
Hey everybody, I'm JJ Johnson. You're watching Reality Survival, and today we are going to talk about some exciting stuff. We're going to talk about typhoid. Okay, it's really not that exciting, but it is important. So I've been kind of going along this trend of doing these videos that talk about, real things that actually hurt people, kill people, and affect your ability to survive in a prolonged SHTF situation. Okay, and we talked about dehydration. We've talked about starvation. We've got one planned for exposure and hypothermia. We're going to talk about we talked about sanitation. We're also going to talk about typhoid here, and the reason this is important is because typhoid is predominantly, only carried by humans and caused by humans and their poor sanitation practices. And we don't see it as a big problem here in the United States now because we have fairly good sanitation systems and practices as a whole, and we've pretty much eradicated it since like the 1920s. It is a bacteria, and it is caused by feces, getting feces in water supplies, and then ingesting those, those waters and all that kind of stuff. And so, why would this matter? I guess because everybody's smart enough not to get feces in the water supply, right? Well, unfortunately, no. Bathing in the water can cause issues, as you could imagine, and if you have a lot of people doing it, then that is increasing the bacterial colonies even more, and then also defecating in the river because you don't have any toilet paper and you just want to wipe up, clean it off or whatever right after right there in the river. People do bad things. I mean, they just make a lot of bad decisions. As we talked about, when you're starving and when you're dehydrated, your mental capacity goes down, you make bad decisions, and unfortunately, a lot of times, contaminating water supplies tends to be one of those bad decisions. And the problem with it is that even though you may not do that at the stream or river or wherever you're located, somebody upstream could do it and be infecting you and you not necessarily know it. So this whole thing really goes to underscore the importance of water sanitation and water purification, and we just recently talked about that in another video where I talked about how to use pool shock to clean your water, to purify your water, and that would be effective against typhoid. But anyway, I got a lot of stuff here, so you're going to know more about typhoid at the end of this video than you ever cared to know. Okay. You might want to put it on ×2, and fast forward it if you want, because there's a lot here and it's going to take quite a while. The sources that we're using for this information, I gathered it from ScienceDirect.com, WebMD, MayoClinic.org, and the CDC. So I know WebMD is not the best source, but it's all the information that I got from there is it was actually just a small section, and it was all consistent with all the other sources as well. So anyhow, let's get started here. From ScienceDirect.com, typhoid fever, and I'll also put the links to the sources of information down in the description below so you can check this out yourself as well, because, don't trust me, you should do your own research, but hopefully this is just a primer to get you thinking about these kinds of bacterias and diseases and viruses and all that kind of stuff that's out there, so that you are aware of what they are and what causes them and how to prevent them and how to treat them and those kinds of things. Okay, so typhoid fever is caused by Salmonella typhi. It's similar to cholera in severity, but it has a much greater incidence and causes approximately 60 times as many deaths. Worldwide, the annual number of cases of typhoid is over 16 million per year, and which is many times that of cholera. Of those, nearly 4% or 600,000 people die every year from typhoid. So in developed countries, it's a real problem. And that is why I believe that it will also be a problem in a prolonged SHTF kind of situation as well. Okay. Death rates for typhoid fever are in between 12 and 30% when the disease is not treated. So I mean that's pretty significant. When you get on the high end there, 1 in 3. That's a pretty significant deal. But if it's treated, that goes down to 1 to 4%. So that's good. As with other diarrheal diseases, the incidence and death rate is far greater in developing countries. Right now, there's only approximately 400 cases in the USA and a little over 100 cases in the UK per year. Typhoid epidemics have not occurred in developed countries since the 1920s. However, they're relatively frequent in the developing world. There were over 7,500 cases in Tajikistan in 1996 and over 900 cases in Ain Taya, an Algerian city of about 45,000. So typhoid fever is different from salmonellosis, salmonella, I guess, in that the responsible organism S. typhi, after initially colonizing the intestines, enters the bloodstream, causing a systemic infection. Symptoms generally do not occur for at least a week and may be up to 3 weeks, after to develop. High fever, fatigue, abdominal pain, and either constipation or diarrhea are typical symptoms. Large outbreaks are generally associated with water contamination, as in both Algeria and Tajikistani cases above. Here's an interesting thing. Typhoid fever is unusual in that up to 5% of people who have been infected with it continue to shed ineffective cells for up to a year after recovery of the disease, meaning they were ineffective in infecting them, but they could still cause other people to be infected. So you could be asymptomatic and not have any symptoms, but still be, causing infection to other people. So, that's kind of problematic. So from WebMD, let's see, typhoid fever at a glance. Typhoid fever is caused by Salmonella intrica serotype typhi bacteria. As you can tell, I'm not an expert in this. I'm just relaying information to you guys. Typhoid fever is contracted by the ingestion of contaminated food or water. Diagnosis of typhoid fever is made when salmonella bacteria are detected with stool, urine, or blood cultures. Typhoid fever is treated with antibiotics. We'll talk a little bit more about the treatment later on. Typhoid fever symptoms are poor appetite, headaches, generalized aches and pains, fever, lethargy, constipation, diarrhea, and abdominal cramping. Approximately 3 to 5% of patients become carriers of the bacteria after the illness. Okay, so, and I'm going over this a couple of times from a couple of different sources, and that is hopefully so that the information will sink in a little bit more and that kind of stuff. I will also have this entire article printed and consolidated kind of in a more consolidated fashion at realitysurvival.com. I always appreciate it when you guys go over to realitysurvival.com, sign up for the email list, and then we've also got our affiliates over on the right hand sidebar. If you click on those banners and go to those stores and do your online shopping, that helps support the channel. So we really, really appreciate it when you guys use those. Okay, and you can also print these as PDFs. There'll be links to the sources and all that kind of stuff, but you can print it as a PDF and put it in your emergency binder if you want to. All right, so the Mayo Clinic. Signs and symptoms are likely to develop gradually, often appearing 1 to 3 weeks after exposure to the disease, as we talked about earlier. Early on in the illness, they say that you are likely to experience a fever that starts low and increases daily, possibly reaching as high as 104.9 degrees Fahrenheit or 40.5 degrees Celsius. You'll experience headaches, weakness and fatigue, muscle aches, sweating, dry cough, loss of appetite, weight loss, abdominal pain, diarrhea or constipation, rash, and extremely swollen abdomen. Later in the illness, if you don't receive treatment, you may become delirious. You may lie motionless and exhausted with your eyes half closed in what's known as a typhoid state. In addition, life-threatening complications often develop at this time. In some people, signs and symptoms may return up to 2 weeks after the fever has subsided. So that's kind of an important point to note there, that you could get better, and then the symptoms could reappear after the fact, because it's and that is partially, I think, because it's a systemic bacteria that's gotten in your blood supply. And it's infecting your whole body, not just your gut or something along those lines. That's just my take on it anyway. Okay, so continuing on with Mayo Clinic causes. Typhoid fever is caused by virulent bacteria called Salmonella typhi. Although they're related, Salmonella typhi and the bacteria responsible for salmonellosis, another serious intestinal infection, aren't the same. Fecal oral transmission route. The bacteria that cause typhoid fever spread through contaminated food or water, and occasionally through direct contact with someone who is infected. In developing nations where typhoid fever is established or endemic, most cases result from contaminated drinking water and poor sanitation. The majority of people in industrialized countries pick up typhoid bacteria while they're traveling and spread it to others through the fecal oral route. This means that Salmonella typhi is passed in the feces and sometimes in the urine of infected people. You can contract the infection if you eat food handled by someone with typhoid fever who hasn't washed carefully after using the toilet. You can also become infected by drinking water contaminated with the bacteria. So from a prepping perspective, we talked about this in the sanitation thing, but it's really, really important to make sure that your outhouses or, your cat holes or whatever the case may be are located a long ways from water sources. Peeing in the river and pooing in the river or streams and all those kind of things are not okay. You really don't want to do that because it's going to cause problems. Okay, complications. This is another kind of important one. Intestinal bleeding or holes. The most serious complications of typhoid fever, which are intestinal bleeding or holes or perforations in the intestine. They may develop in the 3rd week of the illness. A perforated intestine occurs when your small intestine or large bowel develops a hole, causing intestinal contents to leak into your abdominal cavity and triggering signs and symptoms such as severe abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, and bloodstream infection or sepsis. This life-threatening complication requires immediate medical care. So, we don't want this to happen, right? Because in an SHTF situation, unless you're just really lucky, you're probably not going to have a doctor around who can deal with a perforated bowel. That's going to be hard. That's going to be hard to deal with. So, again, foot stomping, the importance of making sure that all the water that you're drinking, all the food that you're handling, is all washed with water that has been purified, sanitized, boiled, chlorinated, whatever the case may be. Okay. Other less common complications. Other possible complications include inflammation of the heart muscle or myocarditis. I'm not really good with all these terms, but inflammation of the lining of the heart and valves, endocarditis, pneumonia, inflammation of the pancreas or pancreatitis, kidney or bladder infections, infection and inflammation of the membranes and solid fluid surrounding your brain and spinal cord, meningitis. Psychiatric problems such as delirium, hallucinations, and paranoid psychosis. So there's definitely some preppers out there that we don't want to get paranoid psychosis, or maybe there's some preppers out there that already have typhoid. Okay. With prompt treatment, nearly all people in industrialized nations recover from typhoid fever. Without treatment, some people may not survive complications of the disease. Okay, prevention. We talked a little bit about this, but we'll go over it real quick. In developing nations, the public health goals that can help prevent and control typhoid fever: safe drinking water, improved sanitation, and adequate medical care. They may be difficult to achieve. For that reason, some experts believe that vaccinating high-risk populations is the best way to control typhoid fever. A vaccine is recommended if you live in or are traveling to areas where the risk of getting typhoid fever is high. So there is a vaccine for those of you who are interested. I know a lot of people don't like vaccines and all that kind of jazz, but it is one thing that's out there. There are 2 vaccines available. One is injected in a single dose at least 1 week before travel. One is given orally in 4 capsules, with 1 capsule to be taken every other day. Neither vaccine is 100% effective, and both require repeat immunizations as vaccine effectiveness diminishes over time. Because the vaccines won't provide complete protection, follow these guidelines when traveling to high-risk areas. Wash your hands. Frequent hand washing in hot, soapy water is the best way to control infection. Wash before eating or preparing food and after using the toilet. Carry an alcohol-based hand sanitizer for times when water isn't available. Also good to know, might be some good stuff to stock up to. Avoid drinking untreated water. Again, we talked about that. Contaminated drinking water is a particular problem in areas where typhoid fever is endemic. For that reason, drink only bottled water or canned, bottled, carbonated beverages, wine or beer. Carbonated bottled water is safer than uncarbonated bottled water. Obviously, that's not going to necessarily apply in a SHTF situation because you probably aren't going to have beer and wine available. But here's an interesting tip for those, just for current times, for those people who are traveling: ask for drinks without ice, because the ice can also be one way that you can get contaminated. Use bottled water when you brush your teeth, and try not to swallow water in the shower. Avoid raw fruits and vegetables because raw produce may have been washed in unsafe water. Avoid fruits and vegetables that you can't peel, especially lettuce. To be absolutely safe, you may want to avoid raw foods entirely. Choose hot foods. Avoid foods that are stored or served at room temperature. Steaming hot foods are best. And although there's no guarantee that meals served at the finest restaurants are safe, it's best to avoid street vendors. They are more likely to be contaminated. So again, that's not necessarily something that applies here, but a good point there is making sure that you're washing your fruits and vegetables with purified water. Okay, prevent infecting others. Yeah, we already kind of covered that one. Take your antibiotics, wash your hands often, and avoid handling food. Okay, treatment. So here's where we get into the treatment aspect of it. Antibiotic therapy is the only effective treatment for typhoid fever. Commonly prescribed antibiotics, and I'd just like to say here, this is from the Mayo Clinic website. I'm reading it directly. I'm not a physician, and I'm not advocating that you use any of this stuff. So talk to a doctor, do your own research. Commonly prescribed antibiotics are ciprofloxacin, or Cipro. In the United States, doctors often prescribe this for non-pregnant adults. Another similar drug called oflofloxacin also may be used. Unfortunately, many Salmonella typhi bacteria are no longer susceptible to antibiotics of this type, particularly strains acquired in Southeast Asia. The next one is azithromycin or Zithromax. This may be used if a person is unable to take ciprofloxacin or the bacteria is resistant to ciprofloxacin. And the next one is ceftriaxone, Ceftriaxone. This is an injectable antibiotic, is alternative in more complicated or serious infections, and for more people may not be candidates for ciprofloxacin, such as children. I will tell you that taking Cipro can really tear up your gut. Like, it tore mine up big time when I was in Afghanistan. And the last one on the list is probably only going to be, available by doctor, but the other two, I believe, you can take a look at like the fish antibiotic alternatives and all that kind of stuff, and you may be able to come up with something to stock on that. Check Doc Bones and Nurse Amy, doomandbloom.net. He just came out with a new book that talks all about antibiotics and treatments and the fish antibiotics and all that kind of stuff. So I'd highly recommend checking out that book. Okay. Problems with antibiotic resistance. Again, this is still from Mayo Clinic. In the past, the drug of choice was chloramphenicol. Chloramphenicol. Doctors no longer commonly use it, however, because of the side effects, a high rate of health deterioration after a period of improvement or relapse. I think we talked about that a little bit, and widespread bacterial resistance. In fact, the existence of antibiotic-resistant bacteria is a growing problem in the treatment of typhoid fever, especially in the developing world. In recent years, Salmonella typhi has also proved to be resistant to I'm going to try to say this, but I'm going to butcher it. Trimethylprimsulfamethoxazole. That's got to be one of the longest words I've ever said on camera anyway. And as well as ampicillin and ciprofloxacin. Okay, so the basic point there is they can be resistant to antibiotics. Other treatments include drinking fluids. This helps to prevent dehydration that results from prolonged fever and bacteria. If you're severely dehydrated, you may need to receive fluids through intravenously. And surgery. If your intestines become perforated, you'll need surgery to repair the hole. And let's see here. So the CDC was basically just parroting a lot of this other stuff, so I'm not going to go into all that stuff as well, because it's basically the same stuff over and over, and there's enough repetitiveness in this so far, I think. Anyhow, there's a handful of these kinds of bacterias and viruses and things like that I think that it's probably important to know about. And so, I was vaguely familiar with typhoid and what it was prior to starting to do this research and all that kind of stuff. But I thought that it would be a good project for us all to kind of learn about. And so that's why I'm going through, and I'm primarily just reading directly from the sources here in this video, because I'm not claiming to be an expert in medicine or any of that kind of stuff, and I don't want you guys to think that I am. Hopefully, like I said, this will spur you guys to do your research. Look into it yourself. Learn about it. Just listening to a video is not going to be enough for you to really know how to handle it, how to treat it, how to recognize the symptoms, and all that kind of stuff. You really should spend a little bit more time, looking into this. So, anyhow, I hope it was useful. I know that these are not the most exciting survival videos out there and all that kind of stuff. But the reality of the situation is, I've talked about this in several videos, in a real SHTF, prolonged grid down kind of situation where we don't have utilities and water service and those kinds of things. This will kill way more people than other people. Okay? Sanitation is going to be one of the biggest killers, and disease and bacteria and all that kind of stuff are far more lethal than, worrying about other people coming and taking your stuff and all that kind of jazz. All right? This stuff is the stuff that will kill you. It's not to say that there aren't other bad things out there, and things can't happen, but we get influenced by Hollywood and all that, and apocalyptic novels and all that kind of stuff way too much, because the boring stuff like this, typhoid and cholera and salmonella and E. coli and all these kinds of things, these are the real dangers. That's just a fact. So knowing how to purify water, knowing how to identify the signs and symptoms, knowing how to treat it, having some antibiotics on hand, making sure that you're using good sanitation practices, keeping your hands clean, all those kinds of things, and when preparing food and dealing with food and all those kind of things, that's all hugely important. So anyhow, guys, I'm done rattling off here. I just want you to know I've got tons and tons of gear reviews coming up. I've got lots and lots of stuff to do. We've got a whole bunch of food reviews. We have got communications stuff. We've got all kinds of stuff on communications. I've been trying to beef up my comms and all that kind of stuff recently. I've got some just basic gear reviews for like bug out bags and stuff like that. We got the Prepper Trifecta coming up that we're going to be talking about the 5 most important things in a bug out bag. I'm going to be doing a video on my go bag is what I call it, my like go to war bag, Minuteman, militia bag, whatever the case may be, and all the contents in that and kind of how I pack it and what I've got in it and stuff. Yeah, so there's lots of stuff. So click the subscribe button and be sure to catch those videos. Anyway, guys, as always, I definitely appreciate it when you click the thumbs up button, when you share it with your friends on Facebook and Twitter, and don't forget to live the 6 Ps. Proper prior preparation prevents poor performance. Stay safe, guys.